with Chuck Todd, who is the host of the Chuck Toddcast, former moderator of NBC's Meet the Press. This is your first official event with Principles First. Mm-hmm. What's your impression of the panel you just did and the crowd?
Look, I'm very heartened. It's a bigger crowd than I expected. But, look, this is... And it goes to sort of where I've gotten, I use the phrase short-term pessimistic, long-term optimistic, and that I know we're going to get through this moment. There's a lot of, it is not lost on me that our highest voter turnouts have been during this period of Donald Trump, which means apparently apathy is a sign of stability. And when our apathy of the late 20th century turned out, it was just the country going, I don't need to vote. Because I know that no matter what, there's at least a responsible actor that's going to be in charge of the republic. Now all of a sudden, we could end up electing drunk drivers. I didn't realize that. We better pay more attention. So it's very impressive, and I think it's really tough for small C conservatives. Where do you go? I was raised by a small C conservative. I sort of the Reagan Republican Party. At first, for my father, was a leap. He was a Rockefeller Republican. Mm-hmm. And then he saw that Reagan really was, a right-wing sloganeer, but really a governing Rockefeller Republican. And he became very comfortable in that party. And so it is tough my friend George Will, like you see.
George Will is also a great friend of Principles First.
You see that this is sort of, to me, he's been the North Star of at least in media, of the small C conservative movement. I don't know where small C conservatives go. And do you rebuild it? And I think that the tough debate, do you start a new movement? Do you rebuild the Republican Party? And do you go in coalition with the left in order to eradicate this virus? I get it. I understand, and I actually thought the tension of that a little bit came through in the panel, which I think is healthy.
Yes.
I think everybody needs to, because I get it. And I always say this, I told this to my wife once when she was early on in first Trump. I said, hey, be careful criticizing some of these folks on the Republican side right now, because you never know, somebody you don't like is going to be the hero to the story. And eventually she wanted to be a donor to Liz Cheney, right? Mm-hmm. So like my point being, you don't know, everybody has a line on Trump, as I used out there, but you just don't know where your line is. But I do think I think restoring sort of what small C conservatives, small government, sort of pro-constitutionalist values are is important. So, whether I think these groups in the long run are either going to be the foundational members of a new conservative party or the restoration of a conservative Republican Party.
Well, one other important big picture topic is the role that the media has played on this. Mm-hmm. You've been in the media a long time. You've been with legacy media. You now have a role in kind of a more new media atmosphere. What role can the media play in helping people figure out the answer to that question that you just posed of whether we're going to have a new movement, a savior of the old movement? The media has obviously played a huge role in the Trump movement, and he's been able to manipulate the media in a way that I don't think a lot of people anticipated. So how can the media, as it exists today, both in its legacy form and some of its newer social media podcast type forms, how can they help stop this spread of misinformation and help people more objectively understand what's happening?
So I've concluded that the reason we lost our trust nationally is that we hollowed out local. Mm-hmm. And I think, when you go back and if you read, I'm going to guess most people that we're talking to here probably have read Democracy in America and certainly know who Alexis de Tocqueville is. Mm-hmm. When de Tocqueville came over here, the thing that he remarked upon, he was most impressed with our democracy was how localized it was and how engaged people were in their local politics. And there was, everybody in there, every local community had 3 or 4 newspapers. Mm-hmm. And yes, they were ideologically aligned. I mean, so the idea of partisan media is not new. It's actually our original state.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Partisan. And so it's not partisan media that is the problem. The problem was gutting local. And the idea that we didn't, and so I think rebuilding local media, whatever that looks like in your neck of the woods. I just went someplace that's been just hollowed out. We happen to be in the Washington, D.C. market right now. We're experiencing it.
Absolutely.
Literally, if a sewer pipe bursts on the Potomac and no one's there to see it, did a sewer pipe burst in the Potomac? I mean, we have our real moment here where what happens when you lose local media. And I think what happened when we sort of destroyed local, people still wanted information, and they clung to comfortable corners, right? And then, of course, big tech with the algorithms. So restoring local. As far as the national media, what I would just say is it's actually natural for some legacy media to disappear and be replaced by new legacy media, right? There was a time Life magazine was mainstream media in this country. Right. And then we got more comfortable with moving pictures. That's no disrespect to Life magazine. We just so technology, technology, if you look at the last 150 years of media, new technology, fragmentation, consolidation. New technology, fragmentation, consolidation. So in some ways, we're in that sense, we're in a predictable pattern. The question is, how do we get credibility back? And for me, that's focusing locally, getting people to realize it. Because if you start to think of yourself in a community, then you stop thinking of yourself ideologically.
Well, we want to end on an optimistic point, and we are asking people, what that you have seen has given you hope that we are going to get through this tumultuous period in our history? As they discussed on your panel, we've gone through tumultuous periods in our history before. The country has prevailed. We're obviously struggling, but a lot of people have hope, and this goes back to your original point about short-term pessimism, long-term optimism. What's your long-term optimism? And I'm going to ask, I was with your producer at Meet the Press yesterday at NBC, and he said when Chuck makes a really important point, he does the pen. So he said, you're going to want to have your pen ready.
Well,
I know.
I put the pen away.
So can we get a pen point and talk about what your long-term optimism is going to be?
A couple of weeks ago, we had the moment where ordinary citizens impaneled on a grand jury said, wait a minute, you want to indict members of Congress for telling rank and file members of the military to follow their oath? I mean, it's essentially what the critique was. And at the same time, we've seen that as ugly and messy and dangerous as Minneapolis became, things changed. We de-escalated. The point was, to quote Bill there, the public's a little bit ahead of the politicians here. There's always that, when I was in college, right, you had that great bumper sticker, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. There's some real truth to that. Well,
public opinion in the Supreme Court is the same. They tend to go where public opinion is. So where's public opinion taking us?
Well, and I think here's what we know what we don't want.
Yes.
Okay? And that we should feel good about. We know we don't like this and we don't like that. And right? We don't want to be divided, but we can't agree on how to unite. So in that sense, I think my optimism is that I think that is the fact that we've been through this before. Unfortunately, people sometimes, a number of people have to die before we act. Hopefully it's not as violent as the 19th century was. Hopefully it's a little bit more like the early 20th century, where we realize, whoa, right? There's too much power being concentrated. They're abusing children, child labor laws, all these things. And we said, we don't want that. And we massively reformed. We gave women the right to vote. We did direct election of senators because of how corrupt that process became. And we had the income tax, simply because we thought these robber barons weren't paying their fair share.
Right.
So that weirdly gives me hope that we're repeating this early 20th century moment that we're in. Same thing, economic transition, fear, that back then it was fear of losing an agrarian economy and being able to support yourself. And instead you had to move to a city and figure out how to find work. With AI, we're having a similar situation. So there's part of me that believes that in some ways because of that we're slowly starting to realize, okay, citizenship is active. You can't be a passive citizen.
Right.
You can be passive when everything's stable, as I was saying with voter apathy. So that's my optimism, is that people are figuring out that they kind of have to take matters into their own hands, use their constitutional rights in a place like Minnesota, do their duty as citizens when they're paneled on a grand jury, that they don't have to just yes the government. I think that shows you that a lot of people are paying attention. This is not, we think, we're so fragmented. People aren't hearing these things. No, I look at the polls and I look at people's reactions. They're all saying the same thing we are. They don't like it. Now, they're not sure how to fix it. But step one is agreeing that we got 60% in this country that don't like where we're headed. That's enough of a majority to do a lot of great things.
Yeah. All right. Chuck Todd, thank you so much for being with us today.
All right. Thank you.